The next break was just a big question mark, and suddenly there was Mary Poppins and Walt.
Remember when a nanny turned a bedroom into a floating tea party, a rooftop into a dance floor for chimney sweeps, and one trip to the bank into a full-blown financial panic? Well, that was Mary Poppins. Walt Disney released it in 1964, and from the outside, it looked like simple, sunny family entertainment. An umbrella, a carpet bag, and a nanny who arrives on the east wind exactly when a family needs fixing. Julie Andrews is Mary Poppins, a nanny so certain of her own perfection that she carries a tape measure just to prove it. Dick Van Dyke is Bert, the chimney sweep with the biggest grin and the most infamous accent in Disney history. David Tomlinson is George Banks, a father who runs his household like a badly managed bank branch, plus Glynis Johns as a suffragette mother with more enthusiasm for the vote than for her own children, and Karen Dotrice and Matthew Garber as the two kids just trying to feed some birds outside a cathedral. And today, 15 weird facts that you didn't know about Mary Poppins. And stick around for number 1 because this movie's box office money paid for a computer, a stoplight, and an emergency brake that are still standing by on every single Disney World train today. And before we begin, hit that like button and subscribe. Think of it as your spoonful of support for the channel. Let's get into it. But first of all, I would like to make one thing clear. I never explain anything. Number 15, voted second worst movie accent ever, and even he agreed. Now, Dick Van Dyke grew up in Missouri and Illinois, about as far from London as an American accent gets. And somebody at Disney looked somewhere at this string bean Midwesterner and decided that, you know what, that's exactly the man who needs to play a working-class chimney sweep. Britain has spent the last 60 years recovering. Empire magazine ranked the worst film accents of all time, and Dick Van Dyke's Bert landed at number 2. Right behind Sean Connery, a man who has never once tried to sound like anything but Sean Connery, no matter what country his character's supposed to be from. Van Dyke's own explanations over the years haven't really helped much. His dialect coach was Irish, and by his own admission, wasn't much better at English accents than he was. Nobody on set said a word about it during filming. Decades later, he still couldn't pin down where the accent was from, at one point claiming it came from some made-up corner of England that, in his telling, was mostly populated by people from Ohio. 53 years later, the British Academy handed him a career award. And Van Dyke used part of the acceptance speech to apologize for what he called the most atrocious Cockney accent in the history of cinema. Most bad accents, they disappear with the credits. This one earned a standing ovation, and then, half a century later, an apology. Number 14, he paid his own boss $4,000 for extra work. Van Dyke already had the job. Bert was his, signed and locked in. But then he read the script for Mr. Dawes Sr., the ancient wheezing bank chairman who dies laughing near the end of the film, and decided that he wanted a piece of that too. But Disney said no. Van Dyke was a 37-year-old leading man, not the obvious pick to bury under old age makeup. So Van Dyke offered to do it for free. Disney's counteroffer went the other way. If he wanted it that badly, he had to pay for the privilege. And Van Dyke agreed, and the $4,000 check went straight to Cal Arts, the art school that Disney had helped build. His own bribe ended up funding the next generation of Disney animators. Now, 2 hours in the makeup chair, disguised so completely that Karen Dotrice, right, the little girl playing Jane, had no idea that it was him. Her fear of the grumpy old banker, that was real. In the credits, he's hidden under a mystery name, Navkid Cade, until the letters rearrange themselves into Dick Van Dyke. There's a version of the story where Disney just says, yeah, sure, why not? But that version, it doesn't come with an anagram. Number 13, the movie's sassiest character was Mr. Banks. George Banks spends the whole movie acting like fun should require written permission. The stiffest father on Cherry Tree Lane. Married to his ledger, the kind of man who would alphabetize his own emotions if he had any. So it's a little perfect that the actor playing him, David Tomlinson, spent the same shoot voicing the sassiest thing in that movie. Mary Poppins' parrot-headed umbrella. Now, every time that umbrella mutters something dry at Mary, or gets huffy about not being thanked, that's Tomlinson. It's one of the only characters brave enough to needle Mary Poppins to her face, flat out telling her that she doesn't fool anybody. And that voice belongs to London's most buttoned-up banker. But he didn't stop there. Tomlinson also slips into Jolly Holiday as the penguin waiter, a jockey, and a race steward, vanishing into roles that most people never clock him as. And he a company. Songwriter Richard Sherman voiced the penguin and one of the Pearly Singers, and a handful of other cast and crew snuck into the animation too. The whole sequence turns into a game of Guess Who once you start listening. So the stiffest man on Cherry Tree Lane was quietly having the most fun of anyone. in a recording booth playing a talking umbrella whose entire job is to roast the nanny. Number 12, Mary Poppins effects won an Oscar, just not the guy who invented them. Mary Poppins won the competitive Oscar for Best Visual Effects.
The winner is Peter Ellenshaw for Mary Poppins.
The man who actually invented the technology behind it didn't. All right, forget green screen for a minute. Disney leaned into a process called sodium vapor. Of course they did. It's a special camera using a prism to split the image in two, lifting the actors cleanly off a plain background while keeping details so fine you could still make out lace, loose strands of hair, even the feathers on Mary's hat. In the 1960s, this was basically Photoshop built out of light bulbs, mirrors, and pure engineering stubbornness. But here's the catch. There was essentially one working camera capable of it in all of Hollywood. And the prism at its heart was so tricky that nobody, including the man who designed it, could ever fully rebuild it. That man was Pedro Vlahos. On Oscar night, the statue for Best Visual Effects went to Peter Ellenshaw, Eustace Lysette, and Hamilton Luske. These were the artists who used the process to make it sing. But Vlahos, working with Disney veteran Ub Iwerks and Wadsworth Pohl, got a separate, non-competitive scientific and technical award instead. Two different trophies, two sets of names, for the same bit of movie magic. Iwerks knew that sting firsthand. A year earlier, he had been nominated for the Real Competitive Effects Oscar on a very different film, Hitchcock's The Birds, built on the same yellow screen trick to composite all those swarming birds. He lost to Cleopatra. Number 11, two effortless scenes that were anything but. Now, everything about Mary Poppins looks effortless. 2 moments from the shoot say otherwise. Take Step in Time, the rooftop number where Bert and the whole crew of chimney sweeps cartwheel, flip, and leap across the chimney pots. Mark Bro and Dee Dee Wood, the married team who choreographed The Sound of Music the very next year, loaded it with tap, acrobatics, and walkovers, and then drilled it until all that athleticism read as pure, spontaneous joy. You watch it now, and it looks like a bunch of sweeps who just felt like dancing. It's one of the most tightly rehearsed things in the entire film. And then there are the toffee apples. Deep in the animated world, during the big Supercalifragilisticexpialidocious number, Jane and Michael were supposed to be happily munching toffee apples, take after take after take, until the kids were thoroughly sick of them. It didn't help that Dick Van Dyke, a self-appointed menace between setups, talked the prop crew into swapping in a batch made in some genuinely revolting flavor, purely to watch the children's faces. By the time that they wrapped, Karen Dotrice said that she and Matthew Garber were done with toffee apples. None of that shows up on screen. A rooftop full of sweeps making acrobatics look like a whim, and 2 kids gamely chewing through sabotage candy. That's what it took to make it look easy. Number 10, Walt Disney wouldn't take no over the phone. Jane Darwell already had an Oscar for playing Ma Jode in The Grapes of Wrath.
Supporting performance of the year 1940, and it has been awarded to Miss Jane Darwell.
And more than 100 other films behind her. By the time that Mary Poppins was casting, she was in her mid-80s, retired, and living at a home built specifically for aging performers. Disney wanted her for a tiny, nearly silent role, the Bird Woman, wrapped in a shawl on the steps of St. Paul's, the still silent heart of the film's quietest, saddest song, Feed the Birds. She turned him down. She'd retired and wasn't looking to come back. So Disney didn't take no over the phone. He drove out and asked her himself, in person, and she said yes. It became the last role of her career. She died 3 years later at 87. The song mattered more to Disney than almost anything else in the film. By all accounts, his favorite piece of music in the whole thing. Some Friday afternoons, he would call the Sherman Brothers up to his office just so he could hear it played back to him. The smallest, quietest performance in the whole movie belonged to a woman that Disney wanted badly enough to show up at her door and ask himself. Number 9, a sequel almost starred the King of Pop. Michael Jackson almost played an ice cream seller in a Mary Poppins sequel. That part's true. Also true, Disney never got within a mile of actually making it. The push came in the late 1980s. Disney wanted a follow-up, and author P.L. Travers, who'd fought him tooth and nail the first time, agreed to try again, but only with someone that she trusted.
Totally unaware of the fact that Mrs. Pamela Travers ultimately would say whether we could do this or not.
Her friend, Brian Sibley. The two built a treatment out of her later books, and Sibley wrote straight to Roy E. Disney, Walt's nephew and then the head of the studio, to get it moving. But the studio didn't want Bert back. They asked for a new character to do Bert's old job, the friendly guide who points the kids toward Mary. So Sibley and Travers reached into their books and pulled out Barney, an ice cream man who helps Jane and Michael reel in a runaway kite in the park. only to find Mary Poppins holding the other end of the string. Then came the pitch that nobody saw coming. An unnamed Disney executive asked Sibley whether Barney absolutely had to be white. He was picturing Michael Jackson, who just made the Captain EO short for Disney and was, at the moment, about as Disney family as a human being could get. Sibley was floored. This was a turn-of-the-century London ice cream man. It came out of nowhere. The casting was a knot. Julie Andrews never signed on, and the shakeup at the top of Disney quietly buried the whole thing. It stayed buried for decades, until an entirely different team finally made Mary Poppins Returns in 2018. The version where, for better or worse, nobody handed the King of Pop an ice cream cart in Edwardian London. Hollywood had floated some strange casting ideas, but that one? That may be one of the strangest ones that never actually filmed. Number 8. Disney got sued over a word that isn't even a word. In February 1965, a company called Life Music sued Disney, claiming that Supercalifragilisticexpialidocious ripped off a 1949 novelty song called, okay, give me a second here, Supercalifragilisticexpialidocious, something like that. The spellings weren't even identical, but they were close enough to end up in court. By then, Mary Poppins was already playing in 462 theaters, with 2,600 more bookings lined up, and Disney had already dropped more than $1.5 million on advertising. One made-up word was turning into a genuine legal headache for one of the biggest films of the year. Then, Disney's lawyers found the receipt that ended it, a 1931 column in the student newspaper at Syracuse University, where a student named Helen Herman had already coined her own version of the word, 18 years before the rival song, 33 years before the movie, and she had coined it to make a completely different point, that she had stumbled on the perfect all-purpose word for having an opinion about anything. Ask what you thought of the film or of Santa Claus, and you could just say her big, enormous nonsense word and be done. One word doing the work of 4 paragraphs. Faced with the proof that this gibberish had been kicking around American slang for decades before anyone in the lawsuit claimed to invent it, the court refused to block the film, and the case died quietly. The word that the Sherman brothers always wrote off as just pure childhood nonsense turned out to have a paper trail running back to a 1931 college newspaper. That paper trail is exactly what got Disney off the hook. The word was supposed to mean absolutely nothing. It ended up as Exhibit A. All right, quick pause. If you're enjoying this, hit that like button and subscribe to Remember When. And tell us in the comments, are you a feed the birds crier or a let's go fly a kite person who needs cheering up immediately after? No wrong answers here. Just confessions. All right, spit spot, 7 more to go. Number 7, Mary Poppins was based on 2 real people. Now, P.L. Travers didn't invent Mary Poppins out of just nowhere. Her father died when she was 7, and the family moved in with a formidable unmarried great aunt named Helen Christina Moorhead, Aunt Ellie to the family, who promptly took charge of everything. Decades later, Travers wrote a private essay about her, printed only for friends as a Christmas gift, and seems to have realized only while writing it how much of the nanny she had built out of her own aunt. Brisk, secretive, quick to deflate any hint of sentiment, and yet somehow able to turn an ordinary chore into an adventure. Now flip to the other side of the family. Travers' actual father was an English bank manager, London-born of Irish descent, who drank his way down from manager to clerk. Yeah, he claimed Ireland as home, and Travers, who adored him, spun that even further, remembering him as a dashing Irish-born sugar plantation owner, I guess. The romantic version was mostly invention. The drinking certainly cost him his jobs, and while the official record chalks his death up to a seizure disorder, Travers always believed that the drinking was really what killed him. She took his first name, Travers, as her own pen name, in tribute. The nanny who fixes everything and the father who needed fixing came from the exact same family, just on opposite branches. Travers gave one half of her own childhood a much happier ending than it actually got. Number 6, the author who wouldn't budge. Nobody got permission to make Mary Poppins. Samuel Goldwyn tried, was told no. Vincente Minnelli tried, told no. The only version that reached a screen before Disney was a forgotten 1949 CBS special that was so obscure that it barely counts as a rival. P.L. Travers wasn't interested in handing her book to anyone, because handing over the book, well, that meant handing over final say, and she didn't trust a single soul with that job. But then, the royalties dried up, and suddenly, she needed the check. So in 1961, she finally signed, with conditions. Consultation rights, a seat in every story meeting, a tape recorder running the whole time, which is the only reason that one of the most remarkable behind-the-scenes records in Hollywood history even exists. The one thing that she never got was the right to make the final cut. Over 2 weeks of story conferences, she said no to nearly everything. the music, the softening of her nanny, and above all, the animation. And every objection is right there on those tapes. Richard Sherman has said that the memory still knots his stomach. She wasn't there to be charmed, she was there to guard her nanny like a bodyguard with a typewriter. Good instinct. After the premiere, Travers marched up to Disney and announced that the whole animated sequence had to go. He smiled and told her, "Pamela, the ship has sailed." The movie was finished, the premiere was over, and nothing was going to change. She never worked with Disney again, and she refused to let him adapt another Mary Poppins book for the rest of her life. Disney got the movie that he chased for more than 20 years, but he never really got the author's approval. Number 5. Everyone remembers this speech wrong. In 1962, Julie Andrews was closing out her run as Guinevere in Camelot on Broadway, hoping to reprise her own stage role as Eliza Doolittle in the film version of My Fair Lady, a part that she had originated and played for years. Jack Warner decided that she wasn't a big enough name for the screen and gave the role to Audrey Hepburn instead, whose singing voice ended up entirely dubbed anyway. Around the same time, Walt Disney caught Andrews in Camelot and offered her Mary Poppins, the studio's biggest live-action musical yet, built around an actress who had never once appeared in a film. At the Golden Globes in February of 1965, Andrews won Best Actress and closed her acceptance speech with a pointed, oh-so-gracious thank you to Jack Warner. Pure, polite, and devastating shade. That's one of Hollywood's most famous acceptance speech singers. Except that's not where it happened. Plenty of retellings swear it was the Oscars, but it wasn't. Her actual Oscar speech, 2 months later, thanked exactly one person by name, Walt Disney, and joked about how over-the-top American hospitality was. No Jack Warner, no dig, just a stunned 29-year-old enjoying her night. The internet's favorite gotcha story about this movie is itself the thing that everybody gets wrong when they repeat it. Number 4, Matthew Garber got paid a penny to take a float. During the ceiling tea party in I Love to Laugh, Bert, Uncle Albert, Mary, and the kids were all rigged on wires and hoisted up for the shot. Karen Dotrice remembers dangling well above the floor with nothing but mattresses underneath. 7-year-old Matthew Garber, playing Michael Banks, was scared of heights. And by Van Dyke's own account, he needed real convincing every time the rig went up. So Van Dyke started paying him a penny for every take that he agreed to float. A tiny, funny detail tucked inside one of the most purely joyful scenes in the movie. A sequence literally about laughter lifting you clean off your feet. Garber gave up acting around 10 and then went back to ordinary school life in London. He died young, just 21 years old, 13 years after the film came out. Karen Dotrice has said in later interviews that she regrets losing touch with him after that last movie together. Watch that ceiling tea party again, and the penny joke, it lands a little differently. The kid trying to give away his coins so the birds outside could eat never got the decades that most child stars eventually get. Number 3, Hollywood's biggest clown learned to make people cry. The man who spends the movie floating up to the ceiling, laughing so hard that he can't come back down, once earned an Oscar nomination for one of the heaviest roles of his career. Ed Wynn spent decades as the perfect fool, a vaudeville and radio comedian known for silly voices and even sillier props, famous enough to carry his own weekly radio show. Then it fell apart. A self-funded radio venture wiped him out. His brand of comedy went out of style. And by the late 1930s, he'd hit bottom, rock bottom, basically. In the mid-1950s, his son Keenan pushed him to try something completely different rather than retire. Serious drama. Wynn was terrified. During rehearsals for the 1956 live broadcast of Requiem for a Heavyweight, he kept blowing his lines and dissolving into his own goofy laugh. It was so bad that the producers wanted to replace him, until co-star Jack Palance said that he'd walk if they did. Live on air, Wynn nailed it. Critics couldn't believe the giggling clown could break hearts, and the dramatic roles, well, they kept coming, all the way to a Best Supporting Actor Oscar nomination for The Diary of Anne Frank in 1959. Talk about heavy. Only after proving that he could carry that kind of weight did Wynn come back to Disney comedy as Uncle Albert, a man so overwhelmed with happiness that he literally floats to the ceiling. He died of cancer in 1966, less than 2 years after Mary Poppins premiered. Maybe that's why Uncle Albert's laughter feels so genuine. It came from a man who already knew what rock bottom looked like, and he somehow found his way back to the ceiling. Number 2, Walt made this for his daughter, who was grown with kids by the premiere. Every fact on this list traces back to one very persistent kid. Diane Disney loved the Mary Poppins book so much that her dad finally caved. And sometime in the early 1940s, Walt made a promise that he had no real ability to keep. Someday, kiddo, that book is going to get made into a movie. He had no rights and he had no plan. Just a promise, and whatever stubborn streak kept him chasing it for the next 20 years. Mary Poppins hit theaters in August of 1964, but Diane, she wasn't a kid anymore. She was 30, married a decade, and already raising a house full of children. Her oldest, Christopher, was pushing 10 at the premiere, basically the same age as Jane Banks, the little girl on screen watching a magical nanny swoop in and fix everything. Others had already tried and failed to get the rights, and somewhere in all of that waiting, the kid Walt made the promise to, grew up, got married, and built her own family. Walt spent 20 years making a movie about a nanny who shows up exactly when a family needs her. His own family had already gotten along fine without one. And number 1, this movie is still running the monorail. The enormous success of Mary Poppins helped fund a brand new transportation system for Disney's theme parks. And part of what that money built is still running today. The safety system under every single train on the Walt Disney World monorail carries an internal nickname. Engineers and pilots call it MAPO, short for Mary Poppins. Pilots are still trained on the term, even though most guests have no idea that they're hearing the title of a 1964 musical. It works almost exactly like a stoplight sitting in the front of the driver. Green means the train ahead is at least 3 blocks away, amber means pay attention, and red means the computer's already made the decision for you, locking out the controls and slamming the emergency brake whether the pilot likes it or not. Every single day before the park even opens, pilots deliberately tailgate the train ahead of them on purpose, just to make sure that the system still turns red exactly when it's supposed to. More than 100,000 people ride that monorail every day with no idea that the word on the console traces back to a movie about a flying nanny, still quietly running the trains more than 60 years after she flew off at the end of it. That's about the most Disney ending imaginable. A movie about make-believe magic ended up being something real, a safety system that shows up exactly when it's needed, every single day, and keeps people safe without anybody noticing. And there you have it, everyone. 15 weird facts about a movie that everybody thought was just a nanny with an umbrella. Which fact got you? Well, tell us in the comments, subscribe if you haven't yet, and send this to the friend who still can't say Supercalifragilisticexpialidocious without humming through half of it, even though the sound of it is, of course, something quite atrocious. Anyways, until next time, practically perfect in every way, of course, this is Remember When.